I know you can remember how much furore in that sense, how much uproar the tax reform bill generated at some point, led by Tawo Yedele, when it came up with these 4 bills to change the landscape, literally, of our tax architecture, literally looking at our fiscal future. And it covered a couple of the bills: Nigerian tax bill, Nigerian tax administration bill, Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. So these are the 4 bills that, when it's assented by the president, will turn to become law, and it's going to be the guiding principle. Some will come into effect literally almost close to immediately, some in 90 days and all of that, so that every business person, every stakeholder, which is you and I as Nigerians, as individuals, as well as businesses, can properly prepare and prep to get ready for some of the reforms. Some people have criticized part of the bill, and some have said, on the whole, it's a great idea. It's not a perfect document in that sense. So we have to bring in someone who understands all of this to bring us up to speed as to what exactly we should be preparing for. So no longer rhetoric is now a reality. It's just a question of a signature of President Bola Tinubu, and voila, we're into a new era. Wale Ajayi is the head of Tax Africa at the KPMG. He joins us on the program. Mr. Ajayi, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, you're going to do a lot of the heavy liftings for us. We know one of the most popular parts of the bill, actually, that Nigerians are a lot conversant with, was a political angle that has to do with the derivation. When it came to population, derivation, equality, and there was that back and forth. Eventually, there was an agreement that keep equality where it should be, 50, and then alternate between derivation and the other element, which was 30-20 in that sense. Walk us through what kind of future Nigerians practically, as individuals, as small businesses, as big corporates, even as government, we should be looking at going forward as we prepare for the ascent of the president.
Oh, thank you so much for that question. I think the very first thing I would like to say is that, like you rightly noted in your introduction, the bill is not perfect, but it's a great way to start. And as we start, we'll then find out there are certain areas, certain provisions that we need to make. In terms of changes, like let me start with corporate. I think one fundamental thing that the bill has done, I mean, obviously there's a need for harmonization between the Senate and the House so that we can get one bill. But speaking to the corporate, in terms of the major change there is the fact that currently, when the company makes losses, they will pay taxes, right? So there's a minimum tax of 0.5% of the income, less frank investment income that they have to pay. Now, what the bill has done, is to ensure that any company that makes losses doesn't have to pay taxes. But then there is a counter provision, or a provision that is counterproductive in the bill, and that is where the bill introduces the concept of effective tax rate. Now, what this means, of course, is that the minimum tax that any company will pay, except you're a small company, which is defined as a company that has a revenue of 100 million and assets of 250 million, right, and below, right, that you then have to pay an effective rate of 15%. Right? So this is that, right, the tax that anyone will pay will be less than 15, it will be up to 15%, especially if the revenue is up to 50 billion. So that's one key provision, in the bill. And I think the second thing I would like to say is that we've always been talking about the issue of multiple taxes, multiple levies here and there. And so what the bill has done is to consolidate, to reduce those number of taxes that we have in Nigeria into single digit. So you have a development levy that has replaced the plethora, of levies, that you see. Then in the area of VAT, yes, you did speak about the political issues, but unfortunately that took the shine away from the bill. That was not the only issue in the bill. That is just talking about distribution. But I think the fundamental change we made in the area of VAT is the fact that businesses cannot claim what we call input VAT, all input VAT, whether it is in respect of services or in respect of fixed asset against the output VAT. Currently, you cannot do that. The only input VAT you can claim is what is limited to the goods that you buy or that you sell. So it's only manufacturers that can actually, or traders that can claim input VAT. If you're a service company, you can't claim input VAT. The other thing that must quickly add with respect to VAT is the fact that we need revenue assurance in Nigeria, and it's the use of physical devices. In other words, the tax authorities will even know your revenue before you file your tax returns, right? So they can track the revenue that companies are making, and they can also track the expenses that revenue, are incurring. So in all, when you look at the provisions, I mean, they're quite, fundamental, and I think it's going to transform, the landscape. If I may just add with respect to individuals, right? One thing that the bill has done is that it has increased the minimum, the graduation rate for tax in Nigeria has changed. So the effective, the top bracket for Nigeria now has now moved from 24, to about 50 million. So companies and individuals that earn 50 million will have to pay the top rate of 25%. So in other words, what the bill is trying to do is to ensure that people that earn lower income pay less tax, and people that earn big income pay higher taxes. So that's all the essence of the bill. And of course, there are some other changes that are, that are incorporated in the bill.
All right, fantastic points you raised. I know it's a political show, and we don't try to talk so much numbers, but it's important because this is going to affect our life one way or the other, so that a lot of people are not shocked. So let's talk about some things. One of the things I want to ask you, with what you've seen, you have an overview, just like some of us have an overview of this bill, whether it's the NTAB or all of the names that these things are called. Is this going to promote and ease business in that sense? That's the first question. And I want you to also respond to the issue of fiscalization, which I've always raised. Because without fiscalization, which simply talks about the technology we adopt to track all the, how the money is moving and out by the revenue collecting agency, this is just going to be a lot of talk without action. So I want you to speak to the issue of fiscalization and whether or not in truth, because in paper it could be something, and when it's implemented, it becomes another thing altogether. Are we in for better business environment? Because businesses have complained we've lost billions of dollars because of policy flip-flop. Are we seeing a future that is consistent given this tax bill?
Okay, so let me address the issue of ease of doing business. Let me start by saying that tax is not the primary driver why investors will invest in a particular country. There are so many other considerations that investors will look like of course, the legal environment, political stability, economic stability. So there's so many other factors that they look at. So it's not just tax. It's not just because of the incentives that a country, is offering that they will invest. So there's so many other considerations. But having said that, when you look at the provisions of the bill, one of the things that we've sought to do in the bill is to ensure that we align with leading practices, and also to remove, the ambiguities that are normally associated, with laws. But in any event, you can't completely, eliminate the issue of interpretation, because the way you look at a particular provision is dependent on your knowledge, is dependent on your experience. So in a way, but there are provisions there. So for example, the issue of ombudsman that they've introduced, that is designed to ensure and protect, the taxpayers against, all sorts of treatment by tax authorities. So there's so many provisions that would help to, promote ease of doing business. But like I've said, tax is not the only thing. Then you talk about the issue of fiscalization. Look at the 2025 budget, right? We're supposed to generate, the expected revenue is about 55 trillion, and we're going to spend about 14 trillion, right? When you look at the fundamental assumption, that creates a deficit of 14 trillion, right? So there's a gap, right? But when you look at what has happened even to, which has gone down below $60, even though the reference price for crude is about $75. So already the gap is getting wider, right? And so we've got to find a way to ensure that we can assure revenue. And one way of doing this is by tax authorities introducing technology. There is no tax authority anywhere in the world that has not incorporated technology, to enhance compliance. And that is what the bill seeks to do. We just want us to align with the rest of the world so that we can guarantee if a taxpayer says he has made this much money in revenue, it should be easily verifiable. We don't want to have to spend so much time, right? Checking and confirming. The trail is always there. So when you look at the fiscalization, yes, it's going to ensure revenue assurance. But the other thing, of course, I would say is that for smaller companies, of course, it comes with its cost. And even for bigger companies, especially in a country like Nigeria, where the internet is not stable, right? So that may be a big issue, but that is the best way to start, and we'll pick it up from there.
One other thing I want you to look at, because at the end of the day, we're going to be taxing businesses, we're going to be taxing people, but we look at Nigeria's GDP per capita, which is basically the relative in terms of ratio between the GDP and the population in that sense, just for common frame of reference for the audience in this sense. So we're less than $1,000. We are in the range of, say, 800s when you divide 182 billion by a huge number estimated. So now that this tax is about to be implemented, there is a portion that has to do with the payee for people who earn less than $1 million a year to be exempted. But our purchasing power is low, our GDP per capita is low. Do you think that the lawmakers did a great job or should have annotated on that particular provision to increase it to say, because that simply means that everybody who earns about 90 to 100,000 is exempted from payee. Even if you earn 300,000 naira now in Nigeria, it looks like you're still a poor man. You're not even in the middle class in that sense. Is that something that we should have adjusted ahead of this?
Well, I think one of the things they've tried to do is to ensure that as much as possible, right, we are not taxing poor people, right, and the rich people are paying their fair share of tax revenue. That's the starting point, right? Now, I mean, there are arguments as to whether the baseline should be 800,000 or should be higher, right? But you got to start from somewhere. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at the graduated rates, the way they've done it, right, it actually, for people that earn lower income, they pay less than they will be paying now, right? And people that earn higher income, they pay more, right? And I think the whole idea of what government is trying to do is to ensure, remember again from what I said before, that Nigeria is facing a revenue crisis, right? Because there's so many incentives that have been given. And the question is, how do you even pay, for those incentives that have been given? So there's got to be a way to, to balance the two. Why we want people to pay, taxes, but let the burden fall on people that are, on rich people. So it's just a balance, a delicate balance that, the committee and of course the National Assembly, they're trying to make.
Just before we go to the controversial part, please help me do some clarification. Because I know that when a public presentation was done, I think it was the Customs Service, I'm not sure, but I think they were the one that raised a few observations. So what does this mean? We have 3 or 4 bills. Nigerian tax bill.
Yes.
The most controversial one, which has a political angle, is the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill. We'll come to that in just a moment. Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill and Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. Let's talk about that Revenue Service Bill. What does this mean? Does it mean effectively customs, no agency of government is allowed to collect any form of revenue from anybody apart from this new board? And what will that future look like if the answer is yes? Help us, educate us.
One of the problems we've seen in Nigeria is lack of transparency when it comes to revenue collection, right? So first and foremost, the bill has not scrapped the Nigerian Customs Service or any revenue, collecting agency. What they've simply done, the bill has simply done, is to ensure that collection, there is only one single point of collection. So when you're paying your custom duties, it goes to the FRS. So there is an oversight, right? So that is what the bill has done, all right? So customs will continue to do what they're doing, but in terms of collection, the collection goes to one central body, which of course is the new National Revenue Service. So just to provide the needed transparency, right, in the way, revenue is collected. Because if you look at it, really, and you look at some countries in the world, they always have one, what you call one revenue service, and that revenue service is always, comprising the custom and the tax authorities. But in Nigeria, we've deemed it necessary to separate the two. So all we've done is to say collection will rest with the new revenue service. That is what the bill is talking about.
So within the bill's framework, I know we talk about the commission, or in this sense, we'll call it the service, because that's the last name there. In terms of checking that there is transparency, there is no corruption, because this means more exposure, more financial exposure in that sense. And this is a situation where we're trying to block leakages, because streamlining means we're trying to be more efficient and block leakages. But people, human beings, Nigerians, you and I, will be in charge of this. How will the government check itself to make sure that the humongous amount of money that will now go straight up to this commission or the service in this sense, we don't hear a story that touch, as they say in Nigeria?
That is exactly where we need to introduce technology. because the only way you can increase your tax collection is not by increasing your taxes, right? It's not imposing higher taxes on people. There is so much leakage in the system, and the only way we can do that to improve compliance, right, is to introduce technology. And if you look at what the FRS, and then if the bills is passed and you don't have the National Revenue Service, they're investing big in technology, and that will help to plug leakages. When you have less manual intervention in any system, right, you can really ensure that, in terms of collection, it is seamless, right? And I know if we do that, it will really put to rest, the fear of people that, oh, why can you allow one single, revenue service to be collecting all this money, right? Technology is always there, and there will always be trail. And really and truly, this is the best way to go. It is only when you have multiple agencies, multiple systems collecting, then that is when you have leakages, and we need to plug in those leakages, because we can't actually increase our tax to GDP ratio, which is abysmally small right now. When you compare Nigeria to other countries and look at what we're making, initially we said it was about 10%, we moved it to 12%. My understanding as of last year is that tax to revenue tax to GDP ratio has gone up to 13%. But we really need a minimum of at least 15% for us to be able to deliver the dividend of democracy to people. And one of the problems that we have is in the area of collection, and we need to do something about that. And that is what the bill, has attempted to address.
One of the greatest tests, Mr. Ajayi, I'm totally out of time. I just wanted to comment on this. Is that part that wants to remove those boys on the streets of Lagos, those ones that block us and block those vehicles on the road. This bill intends to remove them and, regularize them in that sense. I think that will be the true test of how successful this gets to the grassroots. But I must thank you so much, Mr. Wale Ajayi. We'll always call on you to bring your expertise on this subject matter. Head of Tax Africa, KPMG. I'm sure you're very happy right now because this is good for the country and it's good for all of us. We hope we can execute this as well as possible, as much as possible. Mr. Ajayi, thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think it is good. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.